Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, June 16th, 2022, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, June 16th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 9, the suggested minute associated with agenda item 10, accepting the reports of Wisconsin electric providers and aggregators. The Division of Energy Regulation and Analysis is directed to inform each electric provider of its compliance with the statute, or the suggested minute associated with agenda item 11, approving the 2022 report for submittal to the governor and legislature as required by statute.
Move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 6.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Move we approve the notices of proceeding associated with agenda items 7 through 9.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Agenda item 10, docket 5 RF 2021. I move that we accept all of the reports of Wisconsin electric providers and aggregators regarding compliance with the requirements of 196-378-282 and direct staff to inform each provider and aggregator of its compliance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Agenda item 11, docket 5F 267. I move that we accept the 2022 report on the impact of the renewable portfolio standard for 2019 and 2020 and report to the governor and legislature.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 12, which is docket 3270-EI-102. And Commissioner Heapner is going to lead the discussion for this.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a docket where individual customer of Madison Gas and Electric named Nicholas, and I'm going on a limb to say it's Balaz, or apologies to the gentleman if that's incorrect, but for the purposes of the discussion, I'll be calling him Mr. Balaz. Mr. Balaz has asked for a waiver regarding individual electric metering under PSC Administrative Code 113.0803. Mr. Balaz has a 3-unit home. He and his family members occupy 2 of the 3 units, and they rent out a 3rd unit to a tenant. He is looking to install solar photovoltaic panels on the home, and for that purpose he would like to go down from having 3 separate electric meters for the 3 separate units to having 1 electric meter that would enable the PV installation to offset approximately 70% of the whole building's usage. The unit does not have electric heat, and it does not have electric water heaters, and that's an important provision related to the way the code is written today. Also important to my finding is that it does not have air conditioning, which is typically a large consumer of electricity in a home. We have a couple of code statute options to grant this waiver if we want to do that. The first is PSC Code 113.0803 sub 3, and that's related to whether or not the electric equipment under tenant control is minimal and substantially more efficient than required by applicable codes. The other option is to say that this is sort of an exceptional and unusual circumstance and exercise the Commission's authority that way. For this particular case, I was at alternative 1. I thought that they were able to demonstrate that the equipment was efficient. Like I said, there is no central air conditioning, so there's minimal electric usage related to this particular building, and I thought that the granting of the waiver would be appropriate in the context of this administrative code as well as broader state policy around promotion of renewable energy. So I was at alternative 1, and I'll pass it to you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. For this one, I actually was at alt 4. So well, first, I wasn't persuaded by the utilities argument that the code provisions don't apply. It seemed to be a circular argument to me, and so I didn't share their interpretation of the code. For me, the deciding factor in this particular case was the breakdown between the owner and the tenant. And, you know, I spent a lot of time looking at 113 and thinking about the fact that, like other code provisions, 113, when it was written, likely didn't contemplate what we're seeing right now. And so that leaves us with two choices. We can say that nothing now that's coming forward really fits perfectly within the code. Or I think the legislature put in the words exceptional or unusual circumstances for the purpose of us being able to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So for me, I was at Alt 4, and I used that exceptional or unusual circumstances provision of the code, and it's because essentially that building is 75% controlled by the owner. And I also recognize the sort of proposed middle ground of, well, ask this customer to install 3 systems instead of the 1 to comport with the 3 meters. But again, I think you're just getting at the same end result while making it potentially more costly, especially when you think about those additional meter charges. So I was at Alt 4, and I, again, when I look at exceptional or unusual, I use the fact that of the 3 units, 2 were occupied by the owner. Commissioner Nowak.
Thank you. I'm at Alt 5. I don't know that there's anything here that is exceptional or unusual. This is a common situation where a landowner owns a multi-unit dwelling and maybe occupies 1 or 2 of them. You can probably find hundreds, if not thousands, of those examples in the city of Milwaukee alone. To me, the fact that he wants to put solar on the roof has nothing to do with his waiver request. I don't care, you know, it doesn't matter what he wants to, how he wants to do it. I also found that the record was seriously lacking in any data to show that his control was more efficient than code, or that it could be. I mean, he said he's going to put LED lights in or Energy Star appliances. Well, that's what most people are doing. And the solar, I understand what the customer wants. He wants to maximize the amount of solar that can provide for the whole building. But sometimes you can't always get what you want because he doesn't, and we don't know. Today he's renting out only 1 unit. So that exceptional circumstance might change, you know, in a month, usually when, you know, that could change. And then what? So there's nothing exceptional or unusual. I thought the record was completely lacking in any information. You know, he said that also it was just, there was nothing to back up that he said, well, this would save 70% of the energy usage. Where's that data? How do we know that? We don't. And so there's nothing to fall under the exception for the code that this would be more efficient. There's nothing to show under the code that this is exceptional or unusual. It wasn't, I think, a middle ground for me that, now the code needs to be rewritten. There's no question about that. But we shouldn't try to fit a square peg in a round hole here. The way it has to apply now is for the customer to get 3 separate meters. That's not a middle ground. I think that's how the law should be applied. So I'm at alternative 5. I think if we grant, this is a mistake and a bad precedent to start to set because, and we didn't get to the delegation part. We should not delegate these types of decisions to the division administrator because we have no background on how often this is going to start to happen a lot if we're going to start saying this. This is going to lead to some very confusing, I think, and a bad policy if there's a waiver granted.
I think we should grant a waiver. I think that when you look at the code as a whole, the energy conservation component of why we have this code related to making sure customers can see their usage and can then act and reduce it. And in this particular case, over the 3 units, you know, the person in charge at this point is attempting to dramatically reduce the usage in concert with the very purpose of, one of the very purposes of the code. So I am actually fine joining you, Chair, and looking at this as exceptional and unusual. I was hesitant, and I will join you at alt 4 if you're not going to move. I was hesitant to apply extra, costs onto that customer in the form of ensuring that they have, in particular, Energy Star kitchen appliances. Kitchen appliances can be expensive, and moreover, it was my understanding that there isn't actually a code related, like a Wisconsin state code related to appliance efficiency. There's Energy Star, which is obviously more efficient, but like with insulation, there's a code. There's R values and things, whereas with appliances there wasn't, and so it didn't. So I would be very comfortable at alt 3, and I guess I would toss that to you to see if you would be comfortable with that as a middle ground between where we both started.
Yeah, I think the reason that I went with alt 4 is because I do think that the code is specific in terms of it has to be more efficient, as Commissioner Nowak pointed out. And so I recognize that that represents additional costs, but for me, that was the only way I felt comfortable granting the waiver.
Okay.
But what does it have to be more efficient then? That's where I got
Well-
hung up. It has to be more efficient if there's one meter, not if he has, I thought the whole discussion about what kind of appliance he had was a red herring.
No, I think, isn't it that what's under the tenant's control or what's in the building has to be significantly more efficient?
Than code.
Right.
And there is no code for the appliances.
Substantially more
applicable
efficient
code.
than required by applicable codes, and that the overall electric usage, I would argue that efficiency leads to electric usage. So the overall electric usage under tenant control is minimal, right? I mean, that's how that's the interpretation, is you're correct, there aren't any codes related to appliances themselves. However, installing energy efficient appliances has the impact of reducing overall electric usage under tenant control, making it minimal.
Right.
If this customer is, follows other, and if other tenants don't come in and reinstall or just leave appliances running all day that no need, that's where I'm very hung up, and I think I think that's the problem with granting that waiver, among others.
So your concern is that if we grant the waiver based on the requirement that the additional efficiency measures be taken, that a following tenant could undo that,
Sure.
and now your
Yeah.
usage isn't minimal?
Yeah, and I also just think that, this is nothing, these are pretty common things that are under a tenant's control. So
Yeah.
then this would apply to every apartment complex. So then it falls to say, then why is it exceptional or unusual? It's just, he's trying to fit it in because he wants to put an oversized solar panel on the roof. That's why. And like I said, we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And it's just, get smaller panels. Get a smaller number of panels.
Just on that point, I don't think he's trying to oversize it for the building. I think, because it's
his
only going to use
usage.
70%.
He's trying to oversize
right,
it for
compared to
his
his
usage.
particular meter, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think, just to your point about tenant usage, the way that this condition is written as Energy Star kitchen appliances, and I'm not familiar with most situations where tenants are changing stoves
They
and
don't,
fridges.
but-
So
but-
I guess I'm just saying, I'm not as concerned about that. Obviously, they have different equipment, TVs, things
Yeah.
they may be using, but the major appliances would be staying, would be, landlord-owned, in my reading, so,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and you brought it up in your opening remarks, and I think that's why it's in the code, is that there is no air conditioning, there is no electric heat, there's no electric water heater.
Yeah.
But they could put a window unit in tomorrow.
That is true. So I'm content staying at Alt 4.
Okay.
And again, due to the exceptional or unusual circumstances, I agree with you, Commissioner Nowak. I was not in a position to delegate authority under this. I think these are too specific. And I don't feel comfortable with that at all. I think that to the extent that there are additional sets of facts, that we need to take them up as a body. So I know it's jumping ahead, but
No,
for
no, that's
delegation,
fine.
I was at
Yep.
Alt 2.
And I'm fine with that. I'll join you at alternative 2. I think these are fact-specific at this point, and there may be someday future track record to go on, but I'm fine with that for now. Any final comments?
No, you
Okay.
can make a motion.
So in docket 3270 EI 102, I move that we grant the request for waiver under the exceptional and unusual circumstances with the conditions related to the all-electric equipment being under tenant control, being installed as we discussed.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No?
Okay. And then for delegation, right? Do we need?
Don't need it.
No,
No.
if you're not
Because we're not gonna
affirmatively
delegate,
granting
so I
it, you
think-
don't need to.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay, that brings us to agenda item 13, which is docket 3320-TE-112. This is a proposal from Manitowoc Public Utilities for approval to create a voluntary community solar service pilot tariff. The project contemplated under their tariff would be constructed, owned, and operated by a third-party developer with whom Manitowoc Public Utilities would enter into a power purchase agreement. A subscribed customer would pay a monthly project charge based on the cost per kilowatt-hour rate the applicant pays under the PPA and receive a monthly bill credit based on the production output of the project in proportion to the customer's subscription level. So initially, when I read through the application and the information, I had to draw myself a little chart, which I conveniently left in my office. Because it's somewhat of a novel proposal, and there are a couple of nuances, especially for me, as it related to whether or not the parcel of land is going to be leased or owned, because that has a direct impact ultimately on costs to customers. So while community solar proposals aren't necessarily new to us, we've seen and have approved a couple of them. This one just has a couple additional moving pieces. So typically what happens is a customer enrolls in a community solar program, they pay a subscription fee up front, and then every month they get bill credits to reflect however much solar energy was produced based on their subscription level. So what would happen here under the applicant's proposal is that customers would be charged monthly based on their share of the project's total costs. So that is a little bit of a different nuance. And then additionally, under this proposal, the applicant utility would retain the environmental attributes. So staff did a thorough review. They asked some questions. There was substantial amount of information in front of us. And ultimately, I think that if we put in some additional conditions, I am comfortable with this. Because at the end of the day, I'm comfortable that there won't be cross-subsidization, and I'm comfortable that this is it's a good program. We just need to include some additional conditions for me to be 100% comfortable with it. So That being said, we can talk about the discontinuation of participation. That was a big one for me. In other cases, there have been sort of an early exit fee, and it was lacking in this proposal. But staff has come up with a suggestion to ensure that costs are covered, right? Because the concern is if you have a group of customers sign up and then they decide, actually, this isn't right for me, I'm going to exit, and they don't have any skin in the game, so to speak, then those costs necessarily have to be picked up by other non-participating customers. So I think it's important to have the applicant work with commission staff to develop either a subscription or an early termination fee. And I would have them work with staff and then submit that language for approval to the division administrator. So for that, I would allow it to go to the division administrator.
So is it one or the other, or both? You
do you
would do
mean?
a subscription or termination fee?
I don't feel strongly right now mandating one or the other. I would like to see what staff and the applicant come up with.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, I would think, I guess I'm okay with that part of it. I can keep going, but I think that it should come back to us then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
On that particular provision?
Yeah. Or did you, does anybody want to say anything
Well,
about
I think
outside?
it's a different way to do it. I mean, part of me was like, I wonder why the other utilities haven't done it this way.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different way, and we'll see what works. I agree with you on the land issue. We should know if it's going to be owned or leased. That makes a difference in the economics for other ratepayers. I think we'll see how it works for this size. I'm not sure that this method is going to work, and even with and I definitely think there should be a termination fee, and I would like to have them work on that. If it grows bigger, I'm not sure if it's going to work on a larger scale.
Yeah.
So, but this is relatively small, and assuming, we're just making the assumption they need this too. We're 500 or 1,000 KWs, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
That their system needs it. There
Right.
wasn't even a discussion about that.
Right.
But, so I was going to have them work with staff to work on a term. I didn't like, then, they came back in their comments and gave 2 alternatives for the term. I didn't like that either. So I think we ought to keep working on that, how they term it, do that. Because I don't like that once you're in, basically. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. Commissioner Nowak, did you have any comments just in general?
Like just more than just what I said.
Okay.
This size is okay. I'm not going to say this is, I want to see how it plays out before we would do more like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hebner, did you have any?
Yeah, I do. I actually think this is a really elegant and simple solution for community solar. When I read this and look at the challenges of the upfront cost model of having people pay significantly upfront, this option of sort of paying as you go it might really work. So I think it's a good approach. I think kind of normalizing their approach here is essentially to normalize the rates between a customer putting their own solar on their house versus a customer who has a tree in front and is shaded and can't, and trying to, make the economics close for those two types of customers. I think that's a good goal, and the simplicity of this makes sense to me. I agree with you both on the conditions, that we should include some conditions. So I would be at Alt 2 on the program approval to start with, and then as you've both talked about the discontinuation, I agree with you both that there should be a mechanism for a customer to be able to opt out. And as you said, Commissioner Nowak, I think the early termination fee makes sense here. My understanding that we have had a utility, I think it's MG&E, and maybe there's others, but MG&E in particular with the subscription fee, and that to me, will change the economics. So I was thinking the early termination fee was maybe the more appropriate and simple approach. But at the end of the day, I agree with you that they should be working with staff to finalize that. I thought the proposal they put in their comments was fine myself, but I think that staff should have a chance to vet that more thoroughly. So I'm supportive of Alt 2 and having them work with staff and delegating that to the division administrator. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
For the, whatever is a just and reasonable early termination fee.
And Commissioner Nowak, you would prefer that it come back to us?
Yeah, because now we're talking of difference of a subscription or maybe an and or both,
Yeah,
right? And
right.
we're now talking some fairly potentially modifications to what's
Yeah.
before us.
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel like that's something that we should, this is a new way to do it.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's something that we should take a look at and discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I think just based on the conversation right now, it's probably prudent to have it come back to us.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Once they
yeah.
determine what it is, and if we see it and it's something that we all agree on, then we all agree on it, but let's take a look at it first. So I then would propose that it's Alt 2, but instead of delegate, and I guess it doesn't matter if it's Alt 2 or if we just create a new alternative, but instruct the applicant to work with commission staff on developing whatever they come up with, and then bring it back to us for final approval.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that we can either approve it today with conditions or just say, send it back and we'll bring it back and so there's one order going out.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then there was some discussion about concerns as it relates to the project costs and whether or not we should be notified of cost overruns if they exceed the current estimates included in Table 1. And I think that we are all aware of cost overruns that are occurring across all sorts of projects. And so for me, it makes sense, and I think it's reasonable to have them just notify us if the estimated or actual costs exceed those estimates that have been provided to us.
Yeah, I agree, and we could put that, when they come back, and it would be nice to know then what the impact is on the, they should not just tell us that, but then what does it mean for the economics of it?
Right, run it all the way through. Yeah.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
Yeah, I'm fine with alternative 1.
Okay. All right, so then the next is this issue of the land, and it's the difference between how it gets treated as a cost and where it gets accounted for, whether it's a lease or whether it's owned. And then there was talk about, well, the parcel is owned by the actual municipality. And so I think it matters. And I understand that they're continuing to work on, they're not exactly sure how it's going to end up. But I think it is important because ultimately it impacts the costs and how those costs are treated. So for purposes of the land purchase or lease, I would be at Alt 1, which would require them to notify us if they intend to purchase that land and at what price they're going to purchase it. So that's Alt 1.
I suppose, and how, if they're going to roll that into the cost for customers subscribing or against all other customers.
Right.
Have that, and maybe we'll have that answer by the time they bring it back. So I agree with you.
Okay.
Yep, I'm at Alt 1 on that as well, thank you.
Okay. And then the last was reporting conditions. So I read their comments in response to the memo. And in particular, they noted that because of the small size of this particular project, that reporting hourly production curves for each array by month is a little much. And I agree with that. So I would just remove the requirement to have the hourly production curves reported for each PV array. I think just getting it by the system as a whole on a monthly basis is informative. And then the other conditions that were suggested by staff, I would include those as well.
Yeah, I agree with the staff conditions subject to the change that they suggested. I thought that made sense as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot, and the other word that's above that line is by its PV facilities, and then it's each PV array, so I think in both cases, for me, it's just, this project. We
Yep,
want to see
the whole-
the results
yep.
for this project, so as long as we're clear on that, I'm at the same spot as you, modified alt 1.
Okay.
We're just laying this over then? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now we move to agenda item 14, which is docket 5-CE-153. On May 6, 2022, the commission issued its final decision in the application filed by Wisconsin Electric Power Company and Wisconsin Public Service Corporation, seeking approval from us for a certificate of public convenience and necessity for the construction of a new electric generation facility at the existing Weston Generating Station in the villages of Rothschild and Kronwetter in Marathon County. On May 26, 2022, Sierra Club, Vote Solar, and Clean Wisconsin filed a petition for reopening, rehearing, and reconsideration of the commission's final decision. On June 3rd, 2022, applicants filed a response to the petition. So I think it's important for us, and this is becoming sort of common, unfortunately, but I think it's important to point out what a petition for rehearing is. I think that we've tried to be clear about this in the past, but I'm not sure that our message is getting through on what a petition for rehearing is. So the purpose of the rehearing statute is to enable the administrative agency to correct any errors in the proceedings before the case goes any further in the adjudicative process. And that is case law. That's the purpose of rehearing. So there's a long line of cases. One case in particular explains that a petition for rehearing pursuant to Wisconsin statute section 227.49 is addressed to the agency's discretion. And I think that's important. So it is worth re-explaining the function that we, the commission, perform in evaluating projects. The commission's determination of whether approval of a project and granting construction authorization to the applicants is in the public interest is not solely a legal question. Making such a determination requires a high degree of discretion and judgment as it involves intertwined legal, factual value, and public policy determinations. A record may contain substantial evidence to support a number of reasonable findings. However, the weight and credibility of the evidence are for the agency, not a reviewing court to determine. To that end, findings of fact may be set aside only when a reasonable trier of fact could not have reached them from all the evidence before it, including the available inferences from the evidence. So the statute is clear, and that is you have to either come forward with a material error of fact, a material error of law, or the discovery of new evidence. As we've said in prior instances where we've received petitions for rehearing, we aren't going to sit here and rehash the issues that have already been considered, analyzed, and ultimately decided. So in my mind, there's this troubling trend that is occurring, and that is that when we issue a final decision that one of the parties doesn't agree with, they file a petition and a subsequent appeal. And rather than accepting responsibility or accountability for the fact that they didn't persuade us, the petition for rehearing ultimately includes allegations or claims that we're somehow confused, or that we are unethical, or that we are partaking in administrative process that is illegal. And obviously, I have a huge problem with that. The fact of the matter is, in this case, as has been the case in other dockets before us, the petitioners simply didn't persuade the majority of this commission. This is happening all over. We're seeing when people don't get the answer that they want, they revert to name-calling or innuendo or allegations that are completely unfounded. And that is troubling because we stated the same thing when the Badger Hollow petition came up in front of us for rehearing. The petition for rehearing is not an opportunity to relitigate your case. You have to meet the statutory requirement to produce a material error of fact, a material error of law, or the discovery of new evidence. And if one of those things exists, we will take it up.
And we have.
Right.
In
And
other
we will look at
cases,
it.
yeah.
Yes, yes. So the only new arguments in this petition are various attacks on our process. But even in their filing, petitioners make very little effort to tie their argument to the standard that I've said multiple times. They don't explain how any of their procedural complaints, whether with our decision matrix, which that was a new one, or with how we discuss issues here at open meetings, or our interactions with staff, they don't make any tie or any conclusion that somehow that would have compelled a different result in this docket. The use of a decision matrix to collect all the party positions in contested cases is a longstanding practice. It's not secret. The petitioners themselves participated without objection. They provided information to us. And then the other piece that they bring up is that we somehow, some way now have an obligation to issue a proposed decision for every party to review, that somehow staff is on an ad hoc basis writing things into our final decisions that we haven't discussed or that isn't in the record, and that simply isn't true. So unless and until we start to get to a place where the majority of us neither preside at the hearing nor read the record, a proposed final decision isn't required. The same is true, again, of the petitioner's suggestion that here during open meetings, we have to recite each and every item supporting each and every aspect of our decision. We have said, and it has been standard practice, and it has been upheld in case after case after case, that we, the commission, speak through our orders. We speak through our final decisions. So while, yes, we make an effort to be transparent and we get together and talk about these cases at open meeting, it's the only time we're allowed to discuss those cases. And we welcome participation. We welcome members of the public and parties to listen to our thought processes. It's not what we say. It is what's in the record and what ultimately become our findings of fact that speak for this body. The thing that we could do, and they do it in other jurisdictions, I just realized it over the last couple of days, is we could simply show up, cast a vote, and leave.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Yep.
It's well within our statutory ability. And other commissions across the country, that's exactly how they do it. But we push out a decision matrix, we sit down, we have a conversation, not just because we like to hear each other talk, but because these are issues that are important. And I've always thought it's helpful to understand, oh, well, that's how Commissioner Nowak came to that conclusion.
And to other, sorry to interrupt, but to what other people think, it's the only time we talk.
Right, exactly, exactly. I mean, and for people who are deeply engaged in and interested in the policy of utility regulation in the state, it also gives us an opportunity to talk about things that we enjoy and that we see that there are opportunities for improvement or that there are things that are working or things that aren't. And so that can also inform additional actions that we as an agency can take. And just I'll stop talking now. But the one thing that really, really got under my skin were the petitioner's arguments about staff's participation. We employ at this commission an expert staff, and that expert staff assists us in our review of the record. We don't go places without having a lawyer, a member of staff. Not only do we as commissioners understand fully what the laws are and the ethical rules for us as lawyers, but our staff does too. And our staff takes exceptional pains to ensure that when we talk to them and when we ask questions, that they are only responding with information that is on the record. Yeah, I talk to members of staff. Yes, I talk to lawyers. That's my job. I would say that I was being irresponsible if I didn't engage our expert staff. But to come forward with a filing that basically insinuates that we go behind closed doors and that I'm asking questions that I either know are illegal or that aren't on the record, but more importantly, that staff would sit and provide us with information that isn't on the record without a shred of evidence is insulting. Yeah. And so the petitioners didn't, once again, meet the legal requirement for a petition for rehearing. And we could have just let this be denied by operation of law, but I felt really strongly that we needed to address some of the unfounded claims in their petition. So for all of those reasons, and a whole bunch more, I was at alternative 2 to deny their petition.
Well, I'm glad, yeah, there's no question this should be denied, but I'm still glad you brought it up because I have to address some of the claims they made as well, and I agree with every single thing that you just said. Unfortunately, there seem to be a trend in society as a whole that if something doesn't go your way, it's not because of the merits, it's because something nefarious was going on, and, you know, people keep living in the past for those things, and we need to move forward and address. We have granted motions for reconsideration because they met the statutory criteria. Now, I want to address a couple things too. You said it was basically an insinuation that we are unethical, and that staff is unethical. We do not talk about every single thing at the open meetings because it would be totally impractical. It doesn't mean that that ultimate decision that's written or the conclusion when I say alt 1, what that means is based on the evidence in that record, which I'm not going to sit and recite because everyone would be bored out of their mind, that's how I got to that conclusion. And then it is memorialized in a written decision that we oftentimes see. And we saw this one before it went out because I wrote a dissent. And pursuant to the law, it was issued as a one-way communication, but we can call for those things anytime. And so we saw it before, so they insinuate that we just sit here, we don't read the record, we just rubber stamp stuff, and then staff puts something out and we don't care. I mean, that's how I read that. And you know, we put a lot of time, the time we spend here at these meetings is not reflective of the time that is put into preparing for the meetings. That is so true of legal briefs and everything else that is done. So when they come and say too, I mean, there are things when staff has written something in an order that I don't think should have been, I've told them, we'll speak up, but they think, no, we aren't going to say anything. Yeah. And we didn't speak up on this one because it reflected how we arrived at our decision. So, you know, like I said, I agree with everything you said. It is unfortunate that we keep seeing this type of repeat process of people not either wanting to understand or just disregarding what our process is. And the other ironic thing was that while this is a legal process, it's been used for many times, the petitioners here have had many decisions that have come in their favor using that same process that they thought are they now going to challenge those? You know, I mean, again, they're not liking the process when it doesn't come out their way.
Correct.
So
Right.
I'll stop.
Right, and to sort of feign amazement at using a process and processes that we have used for years is disingenuous, especially from this group of petitioners who are what I would consider to be regular participants in our process. And so, again, you know, when my kid loses her softball game, it's not because the umpire was making the wrong call, or that it's not because the umpire was doing something nefarious or is on the take from the opposing team's coach. It's because my kid's team didn't play as well as they should have, and they got beat. It's the same thing. And it's getting beyond, it's getting beyond unprofessional when this type of information gets filed and it gets veiled as a petition for rehearing, so.
I had flashbacks to a March 2019 decision or by a group to challenge the extraordinary session process that has been used. Same type of thing. It was a legal process, and it was challenged in court, and actions were taken, unfortunately, righted a couple of years ago that impacted me personally. Same thing. But this is a waste of ratepayer dollars and staff time. I mean, ultimately, that's just what it is.
Yep.
You're wasting ratepayer dollars.
Yep. All right.
You're at Alt 2, Commissioner Noack?
Yes.
I didn't know if you wanted to just go to Alt 3 and let the clock run out. I presumed.
That was
I am,
fantastic.
but thank you.
I like
Thank
it.
you for clarifying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hebner?
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for your remarks. My remarks are as follows. Whether or not you agree with the overall decision, the fact is that all three commissioners take their duty very seriously, read every record, weigh the evidence, and come to their own reasoned conclusions. On this record, we had a different conclusion as to the merits, but that is within the bounds and the process of what we do here at the commission. For this particular petition, I don't think it introduced anything new that meets the statutory requirements for rehearing, either as an error of law or fact. Going forward, and more broadly, spirited and engaged argument within our process is welcome. It makes the records better. It is part of our process. But this regulatory world is relatively small. The same parties and interveners appear before the same commission over and over. And when you go from the merits of the law and the applicability into personal attacks on commissioners and commission staff, you know, that does not breed the healthy adversarial process that we follow. So going forward, I want to see my colleagues and our commission staff treated with the respect that they deserve. So I'm going to join you at Alt 2. Thank
Well
you.
said.
Yes,
Well said.
very well said.
So,
Far fewer words than,
yeah,
than we
pressure
had.
was a little lower, I think, on that one.
All right.
In 5 CE 153, I move that we deny the petition.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, our final agenda item for today is agenda item 15, which is docket 5-BF-2022. So on December 1st, 2021, the commission announced it would make $100 million in state funding available for broadband expansion grants. Applications were due on March 17th. We received 194 applications from 60 different applicants, requesting a total of $495,648,000. Subsequently, we announced that an additional $25 million in funding would be available. So what's in front of us is $125 million. And I think it's important to note that because this is the first time the funding is being done via bonding, it introduces an additional layer of complexity. And the reason that the additional $25 million was released was because we are working now with bond counsel, and there were some administrative efficiencies to be gained if we did this as one round. Now, there still remains the USF sweep that will occur later this year, and those dollars will be available. But in the interest of administrative efficiency, the additional $25 million was released for this round. I also think it's important to note that the new type of funding was explained in webinars by staff, and a copy of the proposed grant agreement was also made available to potential applicants. So I say that in an effort to ward off, sort of questions of, well, wait, I didn't know that this was going to be a term or condition in the grant agreement. Draft grant agreement was made available on our website for folks to look at. So as is the case with all of our rounds, we offered a 4-week period to receive objections to proposed projects. We received 104 objections to proposed projects from 44 different parties. Those objections were also responded to. And then, as is the case with our Broadband Expansion Grant Program, a screening panel convened. This year, the screening panel contained all members of commission staff. They went through each and every application. They evaluated the relative merits of each application on their own, and then they come together and they talk about it and they adjust and they have a discussion about concerns. And I also think it's important to note this time around that while the screening panel goes through and looks at every single application and they come up with a ranking and we'll talk about what they use under the statute in terms of coming up with their rating, I think it's also important to explain that the merit list that they provide us with is just a guide for us to discuss. It is not that, again, going back to our last agenda item, we don't just show up and say, yep, okay, we'll take them all, and not look at any of the information. We look through the applications, we read the objections, we read the responses to the objection, we meet with staff to understand how different projects or why different projects were given a certain ranking by them. But ultimately, the decision is ours, and we decide for the state broadband projects, we decide based on what is in statute. That forms the basis for how we award projects. And proposed projects have to satisfy several statutory requirements. The applicant must be a for-profit or a non-for-profit organization or a telecommunications utility, or a political subdivision partnering with one such entity. The proposed project must construct broadband infrastructure in an area of the state designated as underserved, meaning the area lacks broadband service from at least 2 providers, and the grant may not subsidize the expenses of a telecommunications service provider or the monthly bills of customers. Staff found that all 194 applications came from eligible entities, but that doesn't mean that they all then meet those criteria or that they meet them with adequate weighting to ultimately place them high on the merit list. The remaining requirement that is that for the purposes of our state broadband grant program, projects must construct broadband infrastructure in an area of the state that the commission has designated as unserved. So under the statute, underserved is one that is served by fewer than 2 broadband service providers. However, statute does not prescribe the transmission speed or the technologies necessary to meet the definition of broadband. So currently, what we have done is we adopt the same broadband speed standard as is designated by the FCC. So for purposes of this grant round, underserved areas are defined as any area that is served by fewer than 2 providers providing wireline or fixed wireless service at a minimum speed of 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second for upload. There's important considerations, and we talk about this each round, and that is looking at potential areas of overlap. There's a fair amount of discussion in this round, again, about federal RDOF dollars that have been committed to certain providers who have stated that they're going to build in certain areas. And so that is always taken into account when we look through this. And it's also taken into account by the initial screening panel. There was, and I think it's important to note that there was an application from PCs for People. We saw a similar application in the last round. This was similar but a little bit different. It was a proposal to provide fixed wireless and fiber service to residents of a number of housing authority of the City of Milwaukee properties. And while the application itself has merit in terms of addressing affordability issues that exist in that part of the state, and these same affordability issues exist everywhere across the state, that is not the purpose of the Broadband Expansion Grant Program. So I think it's important to say that we received that application. There was objection filed to the application, but it comes down to what are the statutory requirements of the State Broadband Expansion Grant Program and the way that it is written. The purpose of the program is not designed to address affordability issues. That might change in the future, but that's not the statute or the criteria that we are working under right now. It's also important to note that there were a number of revised proposals. The screening panel didn't go back and rescore all of the revised proposals. But if those revised proposals are sitting at the top of the screening panel's merit list, it's because they made it to that level as submitted, and their revision didn't decrease the cost effectiveness. In this particular round, it was pretty clear that the match and the strength of public-private partnerships really rose to the top. And again, as it relates to overlap, in cases where there was an overlap, the evaluating panel recommended just one and then gave reasons for that recommendation. Trying to think if I have any other. So, that being said, I don't have any other kind of general background
Take out the
comments.
eligibility for the PC for People.
Oh, yes, yes,
Vote
yes.
on that?
Yes.
It's
What
seven,
page is that?
7.
Yes, okay. So related to that PCs for People and the affordability issues that it proposes to address, I was at alternative 1. It doesn't meet the eligibility requirements of the program.
Yeah, I agree too. It clearly didn't meet. And the other thing I will say is that all of them were on time. And I think that was a first. This was the first time using the new grant system, and seems to work well. It was an easy way for me to navigate the applications themselves. I hope that the applicants, I know there's a lot of hours put into them. I hope they found the new system good as well. I do have comments on the ranking, but I don't know if you want to.
Okay.
Do you want me to go there now? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is I've talked about this before. This is a program that has outgrown the structure we have for it. it was a good structure and method of awarding when it was at its infancy, when we did $1 million, $2 million, $5 million. But now we have an incredible $125 million that we're going to be awarding today. And I understand there's a lot more coming from the federal government, like an astounding number that I can't get my head around later on. And I think it's imperative that there is a new structure in the legislature address how these dollars are provided to the providers in the future. Because, as I've said before, we've gone past the low-hanging fruit. The maps continue to change. I always feel like we're shoveling in a snowstorm because I'll read a story, we have X number to connect, and then we hand out $100 million, and then there's another story, and then the number of people to connect actually grows. So, so I'm like, we're, 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Something, and that has to do with the imprecision of maps, the imprecision of, a lot of this is self-reported type of data. So, someone may say that I don't have the service, I have low service. Well, under the law, they have it. So how is that? Right. So there's just so much imprecision, and that's maybe what gives me so much heartburn when we're dealing with an incredible amount of taxpayer dollars that we're giving out. So I would implore the legislature and us to talk with the legislature about, and I've said this before, let's do a reverse auction. Let's look at ways other states do it, because many, many of these applications are very worthy. And then there's a whole bunch of subjectivity that's coming in. The other thing that we're starting to see, and we saw, I think, an increasing amount in this round, we're now going back and covering areas that we've covered in grant rounds that weren't that long ago. And most of that was the fixed wireless, which I've expressed my reservations about in the past. So now we're seeing, we did that CARES Act round with all that fixed wireless. There's a fair number that are now coming to us and asking for fiber. And, we have got to really figure out, this program will never end. And that's, unfortunately true of many government programs. Once you start it, this was meant to be that last, the but for, but now it seems like we're just, and then we have providers competing against other providers. And this is us picking winners and losers in what is a competitive system. So that also gives me a lot of heartburn, as that's just my philosophy. So then we get to how staff looked at it, and they do an amazing job. They look at they spend months going through these things. And they have a ranking system that we use as a guide. And again, it's worked in the past, but here, as you noted, there was a prioritization on the match and public-private partnerships. But I think the way there was, and we've seen a match and public-private partnership addressed by some of the applicants here in a different way than we've seen in the past. And I'll specifically refer to the bug tussle ones, because that is, they have on paper, it shows a 70 or 80% match, right? But that's not their own dollars up front. That is, they are relying on another public entity, the county typically, to lend the money and then guarantee that repayment. The private entity, bug tussle, says it will pay back. But that is not, I think, what the legislature intended when they meant a public-private partnership. They meant, and how we have applied it in the past, is it's the private entity fronting the money themselves, putting skin in the game themselves, working with a local municipality economic development corp. And I think that's, well, it is one interpretation of a public-private partnership. It's not one that I agree with, and respectfully, that was the staff interpretation. I think it's up to us to make that determination of, is that a policy change now that we want to see? I don't see that. That, to me, is not a public-private partnership. There's very little skin in the game on that part. So that skews the match, too, right? Because, they gave us a high match. So I had a much different, so that kind of changed a lot of the ranking for me, because that was premise, that kind of set the stage for how the rest of these were prioritized. So the other thing and I'm going to go back to the fixed wireless for a minute too, because I have some changes on those. The other thing that was called out in the staff memo, although it's not a priority, ranking isn't assigned to it. They'll say, well, this passes 5,000 homes, and their cost is this, so it's X per residence. That is a very unfortunate way to look at how we're going to fund these for two reasons. One, again, we're supposed to reach the hardest. It's going to be higher, because if this is the hardest of hard to reach, it's going to, by nature, probably be more expensive. And two, they don't always reach. It doesn't mean those people have signed up. So they might be passing 10,000 locations, but then, so I've always gone back and asked, so how did that play out? Because then that per customer number is really off. And I asked, and this is all part of other records, but, we funded 4 fixed wireless projects in Oneida County in the past 6 years. And just for example, and they have to report back how many people sign up. I mean, one application said we're going to be able to reach with our fixed wireless 7,957 locations, but they've only had 256 people sign up. So, while that, again, it skews the data on cost per customer, and we're going back. So that's another issue that I guess I've had. What else? So I removed a fair number of, Bug Tussle found a way, and it was an innovative way, you can call it, to apply, and this is a new way. But I think I want to see how it works before we put a substantial, I think under the staff suggestion, there's $13 million going to Bug Tussle. I think we should proceed in a measured way with this new method of financing. And I would prefer to go to areas and with entities that we know have produced in the past, that have a good customer relationship, have good financial standing among themselves, and to areas of the state that we have still are the hardest of hard to reach and still have unserved members. So I do have a handout. I can walk through it, but if Commissioner Huebner wants to make some other, because then I can walk through my substitutes and what I've added in for that.
Great, okay. Commissioner Huebner, if you have initial thoughts.
I didn't have as many initial thoughts, but number one, we continue to see broadband as a foundational, fundamental need in our society and the direction that society is going. And even though we're past the pandemic or the stay-at-home portion of that, online learning, schools, medical appointments, being able to see specialists in cities that are far away from where you live is a humongous benefit. We've seen it in ag, just the amount of data that's being collected and the need to have access continues to be extremely strong. So I'm very thankful for the bipartisan support and continuation of funding this. As you alluded to, Commissioner Nowak, there's a lot more money coming to kind of hopefully finish the job or get really, really close to get everybody connected. In that context, I viewed this as, another tranche on that path. There continues to be far more worthy applications than we can fund. And I did support basically everything that staff concluded as a reasonable quality application. I also had applications below that line if we want to make some changes that I thought were also high quality, you know, that weren't recommended at this by staff, but certainly I thought were worthy. One of the things, I do have a small handout that if the merit list stays as it is, there was a little bit of money left. So I asked staff, how can we totally fill up the bucket? And they came up with a recommendation that would fund one other small project completely and another project almost entirely, that we could just use up the full amount. But I think that would be after we look at Commissioner Nowak's more substantial changes. On bug tussle, and I don't know if you have comments on bug tussle too, I thought that their proposal was definitely different and unique. The one thing that I really thought was highly beneficial was the way that I'm going to use an electric analogy, they're basically proposing to build transmission and distribution lines right through these counties in a big ring. So they're going to build way more fiber capacity than they're going to connect initially. And then that's going to be available to basically build out, and they said in their applications that's going to be available. They're not going to monopolize it. Other entities can come in and use that capacity to, you know, continue to build out around that foundational fiber ring. And in each of the public-private partnerships, I think every single one, they're providing essentially free fiber to the local government for 30 years as a part of that partnership. We had a question really about middle mile applications in the ARPA round, and we didn't end up funding any because we wanted to see the last mile connections as well. I saw this as a response where the market recognizes there is a need for that middle mile, you know, sort of transmission infrastructure to just be able to move data across these counties that aren't well served, but we want to see you connect customers as well. And so I thought Bug Tussle attempted to do both with their applications. Commissioner Nowak, your point, though, I think is taken in last round. ARPA was really focused. It was federal funding, and it was really focused on cooperatives and nonprofits. And we saw some instances where, you know, I think 24/7 Telecom got like 10 awards, and some others got a lot. And in this round, there's kind of fewer of those, but Bug Tussle is kind of front and center as the one that we would be, you know, awarding the most grants and money to. So I'm open to that question, and Chair Bach, if you have any thoughts specifically on Bug Tussle and whether or not there's sort of too many in this round,
Right,
or
yeah.
are they all, you know, really high quality? They've all certainly been ranked way up at the top of the list by staff. So.
Right. And in my 100% legal briefing with staff, I asked the question about Bug Tussle. I mean, because I had the same reaction of, wow, they really are occupying a lot of the top spots from the panel's initial merit list. You know, are there concerns? Do they have a proven track record? You know, what does it, is it sort of too many eggs in one basket? Are there any red flags? And then, you know, I started kind of playing with the spreadsheet to try to figure out, well, if we remove this and place it with that, what does that do to the ranking? And ultimately, what I found was, and you're right, this is a novel interpretation of public-private partnership. I would argue that Bug Tussle has paid attention to us in our last rounds of discussion, and they've paid attention to to what is important to us. And I think that led to this approach of working with the counties to come up with that type of loan agreement. Ultimately, where I landed was, and I went through and I said, well, if I take this project out and then I plug in this other project, what does that do? And then you pop up, all the objections pop up. Then you go through and you read the objections. Then you pull up the map and you look at the map and you say, well, that doesn't make sense because now if you take that project out and replace it with this project, now there's more overlap and we don't want to do that. We want to avoid that. And so I am anxious to see, Commissioner Nowak, your handout and sort of what it does to the analysis, because I will be honest, I spent some time trying to remove projects and plug new projects in, and every time I did that, when I went to look at the background information, it was, oh, well, that's why the project ended up as high on the merit list as it did. And so I was left at the end feeling a little bit like, well, am I robbing Peter to pay Paul? And so I don't have any handouts. I don't have any suggestions. You know, this morning I had a handful of projects that I thought, well, maybe we can swap these out. So I think it'll be helpful to look at your.
Let me hand it out, and I want to walk through and address this whole middle mile issue. Do you want to?
I just have one final thing on the PCs for people, because I forgot to mention that. That I will join you both at Alt. I'll join you both at Alt 1 on that.
Yeah.
I agree with the sentiments you've both stated about the actual affordability of broadband, and I'm hopeful that the partnership that those organizations have forged, I don't know what staff can do outside of these grant projects to help them connect to other resources, because, you know, if they can offer $15 a month for people that we know are low income, that would be tremendous. So outside of this program, beyond this, I'm sympathetic, but for this purpose, I'll join you at Alt 1.
And that's a good point. And we just returned from a regulatory conference. One of the sessions was talking about broadband and the availability of federal funds in the future. It seems to me that projects like PCs for People will have an avenue to funding under a certain bucket of that federal, the federal dollars.
Separate from expansion, yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to button that up.
Oh,
But
good. Cindy, do you have the handout? Yes. Oh, okay, good. You're looking at me like, hand it. So let me address again. Middle mile, and the premise again, the match and the public-private partnership, I think skews things unfortunately, because that's not a match how we see it. But they said, okay, well, we're gonna do, your analogy was, you know, okay, that's a nice way to think about it, transmission distribution. But they wanna overbuild. And we don't know the last mile portion. They either said, well, we're gonna get one, or we can't publicly disclose it. So I've substituted in projects where right now, I know it's last mile. I know it's going to the home. Bug Tussle is saying, trust us, we'll get there. And they might, and that's great if they do. But again, why are we gonna take such a big gamble with so much, like, again, this is my philosophy, you always spend the money like it's your own. Am I gonna put that much right away in an unknown process? The answer is no, I'll try it out. They say in their application that they're gonna make it available to other providers, and we don't know that. And I'm not saying that they're not, but we don't police that, and I don't want us to. We don't know what's gonna happen after it goes in the ground. And so they want, you know, I just think, let's try it in a few areas, see how it works. But then we don't want to ultimately get into a situation where, you know, I don't want these things coming back if there's disagreements, because that's not our role. I mean, you can even argue it's our role not to even continue to pick winners and losers, but that's a different philosophical debate. So I removed, so it, you know, staff did give us, we had a spreadsheet, it was great, so I removed a fair number of those projects, and I took out there was extra money, right? It was like extra, I call it. Like staff, they got to the 124 million and some odd, so they threw in a couple fixed wireless just because they were low enough to kind of get us closer to 125 million. But I just have a hard time with, well, you know, I mean, they were still, you know, $15,000 and $35,000, and as Bob always says, if that was laying on the ground, would you pick it up? Yeah, I mean, that's still a substantial amount of money. Those are the projects that we're now seeing are gonna come back in a year or two and ask for fiber. Are you okay?
Yeah, we were
Okay.
just having
Okay.
difficulty. Those listening, Commissioner Nowak's handout is now available on the PSC's open meeting. It was just not
Disagree with you?
Well, she's-
uploading it. Well,
You're doing
I
all
was-
these hand
It's
motions.
there.
Okay.
Okay, so, sorry.
So so let me tell you about the ones I put back in. I put in the Spectrum's Green Lake County. I just felt that that was gonna, last mile, we're gonna hit those projects. It's a large number of customers that are still going to get served. Then I added in, you know, another Wisconsin company, TDS, had not, we have funded them in every single round because it's a reputable company. We have had, you know, we don't come back and hear them wanting to go over. Lancaster, this is the fourth time we have seen a Lancaster one. That is fiber to the home. It's not, so again, it's not a middle mile and maybe it's gonna come. That is fiber to the home. The reasons we didn't fund it in the past, it was DSL. They listened to us too. So I feel strongly about putting that in. Again, it's important to that area. It's important to agriculture in that area. You know, broadband is incredibly important to our agriculture community now, and we need to have that out there for economic development purposes. And it's true private investment. There's less risk to all taxpayers because they're not on the hook, and they're not guaranteeing TDS's share of it, like the other projects that I removed. Again, I said they're a proven provider. It fills an existing gap in that underserved and unserved money. That's a tricky area with terrain, but they're still going to put fiber to the home. So I think that that is one that I would ask you to take a serious look at, and the other ones that are down in that area too, the Cassville and Neelsville. Again, let's try the bug tussle way, because that's a new interpretation. But to me, there's greater risk to taxpayers. I substituted those in with fiber to the home. It's guaranteed. I'm not going to sit and wonder if that's happening. So
can I ask how you arrived at those? Right, so it wasn't that you looked necessarily at the merit list and said, let me see what's sort of close.
no, because
Right.
to me, that merit list again was skewed based on the interpretation of how a match was and what a public-private partnership was. And I think it's also fair to say that a lot of them that fell below that line of funding are all, you know, fairly interchangeable as far as merit-worthy. And so that's how I just didn't go to the next one, because I just using the past experience of ones we've seen here, and that this is to me, a true partnership.
Okay.
Do you want to take a break?
Yeah, I
Yes.
do.
Yeah,
I do,
okay.
thank you.
So it is 11:53. 30 minutes. Let's take a 30-minute break.
All right, and we do have conference rooms. Which one down there? Okay, so,
So just from a scheduling perspective,
Yeah.
I have a OMS meeting at 1.
Oh.
So I think we'll be fine, and I can let
Yeah.
Ryan know to be a proxy if I
Yeah.
need to.
Yeah.
Just FYI,
Okay.
but I'll work through this. Thank you.
There's one way to make it easy.
Yeah, not take a break.
Well, no, I would not think that.
Oh.
I'm going to go upstairs and eat a
Okay,
sandwich.
all right.
we'll
ready.
All right, we're back. We're back from our break. We took a break to look at Commissioner Nowak's handout in the broadband grant round. And I'll just reiterate what I said at the beginning, and that was that, you know, it did give me pause, the number of bug tussle projects that were ranked extremely well. And certainly any awards that we give out, there is a level of risk reward. What I struggle with is clearly Bug Tussle has listened to our deliberations in the past, and they have heard what we deem to be important, and that is good relationships with the local municipalities. And I think they took that to heart, and it is a novel approach. It is a novel approach, but I'm comfortable going with what the merit list has, as is. And I don't feel the need to sort of spend down every dollar just because it's going to get rolled into the next round. So I know, Commissioner Huebner, you
Yeah.
had mentioned the possibility of, but again, the same thing that I did when I was initially going through the applications, removing projects and then finding other projects to potentially plug in, I consistently ended up at the same spot. So for that reason, I'm going to stay where I was, which was accepting staff's list.
Yeah, and I'm in the same spot, and it's one of those where you start pulling and pushing and kind of what comes out. I think the things that stand out to me are, I think the I'll call it backhaul, the ability to really cover these counties that we know have just really struggled and give them really robust infrastructure really stands out to me as a benefit to the bug tussle approach. I agree with you. There's a level of risk related to this many awards. I was frankly surprised that they would have proposed so many. But that said, it really meets the statutory requirements, the spirit of getting really robust infrastructure beyond into these rural communities. I mean, I agree on the TDS. We know they're a local company. They're going to be here. I would like to see them bring more local support and dollars in. There's a number of projects I mentioned below the recommendation list, and one of the big things that I like to look at is how much money our local government's putting in, and there's some that aren't being funded here that are $100,000 of county cash, $50,000, significant amounts, and the TDS ones aren't bringing that I'm seeing. So I would stay and join you. I guess I would be interested to see if Commissioner Nowak would fund the other two that I had identified, so.
Yeah, well, I don't know which ones you had.
Yeah, and I think I do have a handout for that, and I can talk through those briefly.
And I just want to rebut that again. I mean,
Yep.
this is, when we said go have a good relationship with the public, it didn't mean ask them to be your bank. And that's what Bug Tussle did. We said work with them on, getting to the best areas or maybe putting some, we didn't say be a lender and guarantee it. So, again, maybe it works, but let's not put $13 million in that direction before we can reverse it. And then,
Yeah, but be careful when you say that, because it's not like the dollars go out the door and then we sit
Well,
back
right.
and wait and hope, right? Like, it is a reimbursement, so
yeah,
let's.
you're right. But I know, like, in the ones that I put in the list, we know that works. So it's just, if we're talking about getting, that's a fair point. But if we're talking about getting fiber to people right away faster. There's a potential with delay there. With the ones I added, I don't see potential with delay. There's, again, less risk. And I want to start to move these out faster with a lesser amount of risk. The TDS Lancaster listened as well. They added it to fiber. If you read what Bug Tussle put in there, it's a very nebulous description of middle mile and if they're ever going to get to last mile. We don't know. And I'm just going to go with the ones I know right now. I think that's, and yeah, it requires a lot of pulling and pushing and speculating, but that's what that's why we get paid the not so big bucks. But that's what we're supposed to do.
Yep.
And again, let's proceed in a more measured way, because this is a very different method this is a public-public partnership, not a public-private partnership. Okay, so you've added a couple here.
Yeah, and I completely respect your view and weighing the merits differently.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
see where you're coming from, and like I said, I think there's more worthy than we can fund this round and every round. So the two that I have, and again, this was, I asked staff if there was some that we could fund to fully fill in the funding. The recommendation that they came back with was that Farmers Independent Daniels Township, so that's a $47,000 grant. They're proposing $58,000 of match, of which Burnett County would be $5,000 of cash. There was no filed objections to the project at all, so there's no overlap or concerns there. And it did have letters of support from their state representative, Magnifici, and their state senator, Rob Staffschultz. The second one would essentially fund, well, it would fund 97.5%. So it would basically fund the entirety of the project, almost all of it. Again, no opposition, no letters of opposition to this project. It would serve about 239 locations, and it had letters of support from the Walworth County Administrator, the town of LaGrange, and a number of local citizens had individually weighed in. So again, when there's this funding available, these feel, to me, they check the box. They've got local support, they've got high match, there's no overlap or objections. I think that just let's spend the money out with good applications, so.
There's no overlap on these?
There's no objections were filed to either of these. So I did not look at the broadband map to see what that meant, but no existing provider opposed these. And they're both fiber to the home.
Yeah, I know it's up, he's directing this to you anyway, because I've already
No, that's fine.
opined. The one thing that concerns me, because again, I tried doing this too, the one thing that concerns me about Project 89 is that there are 0 unserved, and that,
Right.
for me, I'd rather,
Unserved at the 25.3 definition. So there's not fiber there.
Right.
There may be DSL or something.
Right.
But,
yep.
yeah.
There's probably fixed wireless we funded in the past.
Yeah, I'm comfortable just keeping.
Well, let me look at the other one here. I know this is exciting YouTube, but. Oh, yeah. So do you guys want to keep the 2 fixed wireless that they threw in at the end too?
Is that the Wapaka? Mm-hmm. Yeah. My understanding, especially with the backhaul project, is that it's a really good project because it's increasing the flow-through capacity. And so I was okay with keeping them both.
Because if we dropped one or both, we could fully fund one of the, because you're just short on your other
Yeah,
one.
it's like $2,000, so and the match is primarily from Edge Broadband, so it was my
Okay.
presumption that they would be able to cover that second
So,
one, so.
Commissioner Nowak, if we removed Wapaka number 2, which is project 192, then you're saying there would be enough to fully fund both of Commissioner Hebner's?
And it's fiber. I'm just always,
Yeah.
you know. I'm guessing Commissioner Hebner doesn't object to that. Or,
I'm fine funding those projects. I know there's different opinions about fixed wireless, but one of the things that that appeals to me is just the price point of being able to get affordable access to folks. I'm fine if you both decide to remove it too, but I think that with those fixed wireless ones in, which are relatively small, and these one entirely funded and one basically entirely funded, that, you know, all four could move forward, so. But
yeah, I would propose then dropping one of the fixed wireless and adding the 2 fiber fully funded.
say what now?
I would drop one of the, how much did you need on your?
Only $2,000, so that's why I
Yeah,
thought it would be a little bit.
I would drop the, you know, Wapaka, one of the 2 Wapakas online, one backhaul, or we can do tower and fully fund the fiber, because we are seeing, it says a lot, but just from history of what is being reported in their grant reports, people aren't signing up for fixed wireless like we hope.
I'd be okay dropping Wapaka Online number 2, which is project number 192. Dropping that off the list and then fully funding both of your additions.
Okay.
I will support the whole thing, but probably write something.
Okay. I can support that package.
Okay.
I move that in docket 5 BF 2022, we approve the fiscal year 2022 broadband expansion grants as proposed or
Second.
discussed.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Oh, okay.
Chair, I have a question. I want to bring something up before you move to adjourn.
Yeah.
On a different one we talked about earlier, the consumer waiver issue. We did not discuss, and I just want to make it clear, if anyone is still listening, that we saw Renew Wisconsin file comments, and they were not an intervener, but they filed some substantial comments, brought in new evidence into the record. MGNE asked us to strike. This isn't a contested proceeding, so, you know, but I just want to be clear that, obviously, I wasn't supportive anyway. That had nothing to do with, I thought their comments that filing was inappropriate, and I don't think that when staff does write the order, it should be relied upon as, you know, any, and I just didn't know if you guys had, where you landed on that, so when the order is written, it can be taken into consideration, because I thought those comments were inappropriate.
I can affirmatively state that I did not use anything from the comments filed by Renew in making my decision.
Okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up
Yeah, I
from a
forgot.
procedural perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can state that too. The broader question I had was, you know, not wanting to stifle public comments. Obviously, we get lots of public comments. Some of them are 80 pages long with lots of research. I want to welcome that, and we weigh it and decide what to do with it, but I don't want to send a signal that we're going to strike public comments. And I know this was kind of a minor case, but obviously, it was certainly raised by MGE, but I agree with that, so thank you.
Okay, ready?
I'm now ready.
All right.
Nothing else.
That concludes our official business for today. The next open meeting is scheduled for, is that really Wednesday?
Yeah. No.
Thursday.
No, it's Thursday.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
They forgot to change the second part.
Thursday, July 14th, correct?
Yes.
At 10:30. So no meeting next week and no meeting the week of 4th of July.
I move we stand adjourned until Thursday, July 14th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
She's reading from her printed of the E.